Good morning, and welcome to the third hearing of the Chemical Safety, Waste Management, Environmental Justice, and Regulatory Oversight Subcommittee on the environmental and public health dangers and solutions in regard to plastics. The folk singer Pete Seeger once said, "If it can't be reduced, reused, repaired, rebuilt, refurbished, resold, recycled, or composted, then it should be restricted or redesignated or removed from production." Well, we're here to explore kind of that philosophy in the context of how to have our containers and packaging have a longer life and serve us better than the single-use world we're often living in. Generations have grown up believing the mantra of the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, and then everything's resolved. But we know with plastics only about 8%, and it's dropped, I think, this last year to 6% is recycled. Instead, it gets the 3 B's. It's buried, it's burned, it's borne out to sea. It really has a remarkable, almost near eternal lifespan. Just plastics break down into smaller and smaller pieces until they're microplastics. They're in our lungs, they're in our bloodstream, they're in the breast milk we feed our babies. They're full of all kinds of chemicals that we don't necessarily want in our bodies or our bloodstream or our breast milk. That's to say nothing of the massive amount of fossil fuels needed to produce single-use plastics. I was thinking back to when I was in grade school, and Alpenrose Dairy had a box on our front porch, and they dropped off the milk in a glass jar, and then the empty glass jug went back into the box, and according to whatever you've ordered, other products showed up, and those glass jars just got used eternally. Or when I was, after my senior year of high school, I was working as a mechanic, and the lunchroom had a vending machine, and I would get an orange soda in glass jar, and every time one, or a glass bottle, every time one was different, I'd put it up on the wall. And by the end of the summer, had, I don't know, 8 to 12 different evolutions because the bottles were simply washed and reused and reused and reused. Well, the old sometimes becomes the new. Ideas that we had in the past get looked at again as we face different issues. With reusable containers, consumers can either refill containers or return them to be sanitized, refilled, or restocked on store shelves. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is represented here today by one of our witnesses, estimates that replacing just 20% of single-use plastic packaging with reusables would be an opportunity worth at least $10 billion of economic activity. The World Economic Forum estimates that reusing just 10% of plastic products would cut annual amount of ocean plastic pollution by 50%. Well, this isn't theoretical. We're already making recycling work in Oregon. Oregon was the first state to require that all bottles are returnable with a deposit, and 90% of our bottles are recycled. It's a program that employs about 500 people across the state. Even some of our Oregon brewers are now using a common beer bottle that can be cleaned and refilled up to 40 times, meaning they don't need the bottle, that is they being the bottles, don't need to be crushed or melted or remade after every use. Well, that actually does go right back to the experience we had early in the bottle bill in my state. And it's not just bottles we're talking about, it's just not drinks we're talking about. At 25 Fred Meyer stores in the Portland metropolitan area and some giant grocery stores right here in DC, customers can buy products from name brands like Cascade, Clorox, Gillette in reusable containers from Loop, an innovative company that is also represented on today's panel. We're fortunate to have a few witnesses who will help us learn more about how you build a culture and an economy of reusables. We are joined by Daisy Meng from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which focuses on the issue of plastics and rebuilding a circular economy. We're also joined by Clement Schmid, who is the general manager for Loop, a social enterprise whose mission is, quote, eliminating the idea of waste. With them is Tim Debus. Did I get that right? Close, Debus, the president and CEO of Reusable Packaging Association, whose member companies promote reusable transport packaging systems like pallets, bins, and containers. Thank you all for being here this morning. And with that, let me turn things over to the ranking member of the committee, Senator Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking all of our witnesses for attending this hearing today. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. It's not always an easy trip to get here to Washington, D.C., and it's definitely not an easy trip getting back home. So we do want to thank you for taking the time to enlighten us and share your thoughts and your experiences. As I said in our first subcommittee hearing, I believe free market innovation is the best way to promote sustainability in all forms of waste management, whether it be in reusable packaging or recycling. However, as we discuss potential solutions, we must ensure America's supply chains remain productive and competitive in the global market. As we have seen in America and in other countries, a one-size-fits-all mandate is not necessarily the right solution, especially for smaller businesses who are less likely to be able to absorb those extra costs. Businesses should not be forced to spend time and capital on unnecessary and erroneous regulations that do not serve their customers or their business model. Regulatory overreach has the potential to hamper free market solutions, including for reusable and refillable packaging. These solutions should not require a heavy hand of government to be successful in the marketplace. Our nation's economy thrives when private industry has the right to choose how to tackle these hard to address issues in a way that provides realistic, affordable, and attractive solutions for both consumers and businesses. Otherwise, these ideas simply won't survive. Again, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to hearing y'all's testimonies.
Thank you very much, and we'll now turn to our panel. We are grateful for you joining us today and bringing your experiences and knowledge, and we'll begin with Daisy Meng from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chairman Merkley, Ranking Member Mullen. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic. As you said, I am Daisy Meng, the Policy and Institutions Senior Manager at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in North America. EMF is a nonprofit organization with the aim of accelerating the transition to a circular economy in order to tackle some of the biggest challenges we face today, like climate change, biodiversity loss, waste, and pollution. This work is more important to me now than ever, as I've just returned last week from maternity leave after having my second son. So I'm very grateful to be here with you all today and be talking about this. Anyhow, one of EMF's kind of key areas of focus is plastic. We have published and continue working on research on the topic. We have mobilized businesses and other leaders toward a more circular economy for plastics. In collaboration with the UN Environment Program, our global commitment has united more than 500 organizations representing 20% of all plastic packaging produced globally behind a common vision of a circular economy for plastics that includes reuse. And we have convened the Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty together with WWF. That brings together over 130 businesses and financial institutions committed to supporting the development of an ambitious, effective, and legally binding UN treaty to end plastic pollution. The Business Coalition has called for global support for reuse policies. Today, I will quickly cover why reuse is key to addressing plastic pollution, what we mean when we talk about reuse, why we need policy intervention, and what policy tools can best support reuse systems. To start, reuse is key to addressing plastic pollution. No single strategy can sufficiently reduce plastic leakage into the oceans. Reducing plastic pollution requires a comprehensive and integrated set of solutions, from material redesign, plastic reduction, substitution, and reuse, all the way to improved recycling and disposal systems. Reuse is an essential component in this mix and has incredible economic potential. As Senator Merkley said, replacing 20% of single-use plastic packaging with reusable materials represents a $10 billion opportunity. Furthermore, scaling reuse options and new delivery models is key to reducing material consumption, decreasing single-use plastic applications, taking effective action against plastic pollution, and capturing co-benefits. To accelerate collaborative action on scaling reuse, EMF is currently working with reuse partners and experts to show how scaled reuse return systems can perform economically, environmentally, and experientially in comparison to single use. Now, for what is reuse, or what is a reuse return system? Reusing packaging means that the packaging is refilled or used again for the same purpose for which it was conceived. Reusable packaging has been designed to be, or has proven it can be, reused a minimum number of times. By contrast, single-use packaging is designed to be used just once. When talking about reuse, it may be helpful to think of business-to-consumer reuse in 4 different categories: packages that are refilled at home, refilled on the go, returned from home, or returned on the go. These systems present countless potential benefits, but there are challenges to implementing reuse models in practice, resulting in the need for policy intervention to fully capture the reuse opportunity. Reuse will be a crucial piece of the solution to reduce plastic pollution, but business as usual cannot get us there. Current commitments will only get us a 7% decrease in plastic flow into the ocean by 2040. We need policy intervention to address the barriers to building and scaling the shared infrastructure and systems required to make the economics work and maximize the environmental benefits of reuse. The Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty has called for policy support to encourage further investments into reuse and refill systems, recommending realistic targets combined with effective economic incentives, definitions, and metrics to shift the supply chain. Businesses want a level playing field, and they need policy to get there. We need ambitious binding reuse targets to reach the scale and shared infrastructure needed. We need measures to make the economics work, like extended producer responsibility, deposit return schemes, tax breaks, grant funding, etc. And we need harmonized definitions and design to help ensure that we are building efficient, beneficial, and scalable systems. These policies will keep packaging in the economy at its highest value for as long as possible and avoid the production of virgin plastics. It is best if these policies are packaged together at the federal level and are consistent with action underway at the global level. While local and small-scale solutions have demonstrated the opportunity and will continue to play a key role in the implementation of reuse systems, we need cohesive federal action to accelerate progress. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, and welcome back from maternity leave, and congratulations. You said your second son? All right, that's just awesome. That's the best part of life, is raising those kids. We're going to turn next to Clemens Schmid, who serves as General Manager at Loop Global. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley and committee members, for the opportunity to speak at this hearing. I am Clemens Schmid, General Manager of Loop, a global reuse platform launched by TerraCycle. As background, TerraCycle, headquartered in Trenton, New Jersey, is on a mission to eliminate the idea of waste. We employ over 500 people providing national recycling, recycled content, and reuse services in 20 countries for 20 years. We run national platforms to collect and recycle hard-to-recycle products and packages, ranging from flexible food packaging to personal protective equipment, toothbrushes to clear blister pack, and even cigarette butts and dirty diapers. TerraCycle manages the largest contact lens and eye care recycling program in the United States and is the world's leading recycler of coffee capsules and beauty waste, to just name a few. TerraCycle launched Loop in 2019. Loop enables brands and retailers to shift from single-use packaging system to a reusable one in the most convenient way possible. As a result, we have partnered with the leading retailers in the United States, France, and Japan, from Walmart to Carrefour, as well as 200 leading consumer goods companies from Procter & Gamble to Nestlé. In focusing on the 3 most important stakeholders to transition from disposable to reusable consumption, consumers, brands, and retailers, the primary goal of Loop has been to enable the transition to reuse in the least disruptive way possible. For consumers, the shopping experience is the same. Simply buy your everyday product at your preferred retailer. There is no requirement to clean or refill oneself. The only new concept is a fully refundable deposit attached to each container at purchase. This deposit is then reimbursed in full upon the return of the empty package at any participating location, regardless of where it was purchased. As you can see here, the goal is to make a reusable purchase feel like a disposable one. For brand, Loop is able to integrate any disposable product, from baby food to motor oil to peanut butter, shampoo, or laundry detergent, with the goal of driving the least amount of change to existing supply chains as possible. In fact, the only change to enable reuse with Loop is to shift from disposable container to a reusable one. For retailers, everything stays the same. as with the disposable product distribution. The only change is to enable a Loop return bin at the front of their stores. Loop acts as a central platform steward and is operationally the waste management function of reuse. We collect back the empty use container, sort, store, and clean them, and we return deposit. Our objective is to make reuse as convenient and affordable as single use. Reuse has to be part of our future. Reuse is better for the environment. This has been shown multiple times in different studies like third-party reviewed life cycle assessment from both the private and public sector. Reuse creates more jobs. It creates significantly more domestic jobs than disposal or even recycling. Reuse avoids the negative impact of disposable plastic production, a form of pollution that affects predominantly disadvantaged and minority communities in the United States. Reuse is financially viable. It has run at scale in the United States until the 1950s, and today runs at scale in Canada with beer, all the way to Germany with most beverages, as well as in the business-to-business sector with secondary and tertiary packaging. By treating packaging as an asset versus a cost of goods sold, the Loop platform enables manufacturers to innovate and create better packaging. In the process, manufacturers become financially motivated to make their packages as long-lasting as possible. Reuse is proven with consumers, brands, and retailers. The key to unleashing the full environmental and economic opportunity is simply to scale. More product available in more stores and more return points. But scaling reuse requires investment from private actors. To invest, the business needs certainty. We believe the government can support this in two ways. Support through legislation. For example, we are very supportive of reuse being part of Senator Merkley's National Bottle Bill and would recommend not to limit it to bottle only. Providing public funding to scale reuse. This funding should be focused on the infrastructure creation and the reuse platform operators. Now is the moment to act. Delaying action could stall the measurable progress that have been made towards a more sustainable future and set us back decades. With existing consumer demand, voluntary action underway, government support will be the catalyst to turn reuse into a full-scale national reality. I urge you to actively support reuse through legislation and investment. I appreciate the opportunity to provide that testimony and would be pleased to address any question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for bringing your expertise on this model to the panel for discussion and education. Appreciate it. And we're going to now turn to Tim Debus. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley, Ranking Member Mullen, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to share insights on reusable packaging and the important role of reuse infrastructures for not only environmental benefit, but also for economic value creation and social well-being. My name is Tim Debus, and I represent the nonprofit Global Trade Organization for the Reusable Transport Packaging Industry. The Reusable Packaging Association, or RPA, consists of businesses that supply, use, and provide services to supply chain packaging products like pallets, bulk bins, containers, trays, for their continuous use in a managed system featuring the packaging's recovery, maintenance, and return for their intended purpose. Today, RPA member companies are collectively involved in handling or servicing billions of reusable transport movements each year for commercial goods worldwide. Still, overall, reusable packaging is the minority share in the supply chain. I want to emphasize 3 points on reusable packaging as part of the solution for single-use waste. First, reuse is not about the material or the product, but the system. No packaging can be considered reusable unless it can be collected, returned, and prepared cost-effectively for another use. We need to be systems thinkers when it comes to solving complex environmental problems. And this is the crux of reusable packaging, in which collaboration and coordination within operating systems lead to eliminating solid waste and pollution. Also, reusable packaging is material neutral, typically made from plastics, wood, aluminum, or glass. The key is product design for durability, not disposability, using safe and recyclable materials, and having the system in place to ensure repeated use and end-of-life recycling. Plastic-based reusable packaging can be very effective in a managed system where product utility is extended and plastic material is valued. In my written testimony, I cite several real-world examples about how RPA member companies are keeping plastics in circulation and out of the environment. My second point is that reuse systems are really about getting and generating new economic growth and value. If we only consider reusable packaging in response to environmental problems or sustainability quotas, then we are missing the big picture opportunity. Reusable products can be designed with feature-rich properties that optimize performance and user experience, and embed technologies for smart data capturing outputs. These properties can save money in transportation and warehousing, reduce food damage and waste, offer ergonomic designs for worker safety, perform with automated or robotic handling systems, and most excitingly, bring tech-enabled visibility to supply chains. Reuse also builds resiliency in business operations by being available and already available for use, avoiding volatile raw material pricing and supply constraints that can interfere with the endless manufacturing of single-use products. A national strategy that incentivizes reusable packaging systems can have far-reaching economic impacts. With reuse, we can achieve both economic and environmental prosperity. My third point is that there are many federal policy opportunities to support reuse infrastructures, but we need to prioritize reuse and broaden the material scope. The bipartisan infrastructure law less than 2 years ago heavily invests to transform municipal solid waste management and recycling. Now Congress has the opportunity to prioritize game-changing investments in reuse systems, striking the right balance on complementary pieces to the puzzle: reuse for waste prevention and recycling for waste management. A national strategy in advancing reusable and refillable packaging systems should prevent waste of all material types, not just plastics. We should institute consistency across waste streams, avoid fragmented efforts in our source reduction initiatives, and change behaviors and culture for the responsible use of all resources. A final comment is lesser known, but is very important to our industry, is the need to strengthen enforcement of crime laws and prosecutions pertaining to the theft of stolen reusable packaging assets. We make great products with valued materials, and far too often they are getting stolen, diminishing the reuse potential. We appreciate the time to be here today, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you all. We're going to dive right into 5-minute periods. And I'll just jump right in. And Ms. Meng, I think your team is involved in the international discussion, because plastics in oceans is, for example, not just an American challenge, but a global challenge. And so I think the foundation convened the Business Coalition for Global Plastics Treaty. What is really the core goal of that? Is it to set targets, or will it have is the goal to have requirements that each nation basically says, yes, we're going to do X, Y, Z to accomplish those goals?
Yeah, so I think if I understand your question, it's about the UN negotiations around the Global Plastics Treaty and whether kind of the Business Coalition will be looking at nationally determined contributions or national action plans where countries are deciding what they're doing, or if there will be kind of mandatory components to the international treaty. And from EMF's perspective, and I believe also the Business Coalition's perspective, we need binding reuse targets on the topic of reuse in particular, but binding targets in the treaty itself. So rather than kind of having countries self-determining what those targets will be, of course they will be implemented by the individual countries.
Right now, I believe the U.S. is pushing to not have binding targets and kind of more set a, if you will, kind of a happy talk about what could possibly be achieved. But that won't get us there.
I agree.
Okay. Ms. Schmid, I'm picturing, for example, the plastic jug that I have with liquid laundry detergent. And so you spoke about fully refundable deposits. So in Oregon, we have a deposit on bottles, a 10% deposit, and it's resulted in about a 90% return rate. Is it basically, is the concept extending that model to everything else, shampoo bottles, laundry detergent bottles, so on and so forth?
So the system is about bringing the value into the package, and we know deposit is a very good way to do it without burdening the citizen. So yes, it's about bringing a deposit on everything.
Okay, so we have a system in Oregon where you throw everything into a bag, and then the bag is tossed into a tray at a warehouse, and a computer takes a picture of it and immediately evaluates how much of those things are recyclable. And it's an amazing system to watch it in action. It works really well. But if that type of program was extended to other plastic bottles of all kinds, do you see that as workable? Has any state undertaken to really expand? Because it's really set up for, lots of things that look like a soda bottle. Other plastic containers are maybe much larger, maybe much different in shape, but can the same basic system be expanded?
So that is about building the infrastructure that is tailored for reuse as opposed to recycling as we have. In reuse, every container are sorted individually, and this is what Loop has been demonstrated, not only in the US, but also in Europe and in Japan. So the technology would be close to what you're describing, but would be step up in order to be able to isolate packaging at a shape, material, and content level.
All right, so I've got these bottles right currently. Some of them are reused through that system I'm describing. Some of them are reused, like the glass bottles that come, but all the plastic ones are essentially ground up for recycling, which means different types of plastic have to be sorted and on how much can be rebuilt from them. But you're really, I think, if I understand right, saying the best solution would be for that laundry detergent bottle to be able to be refilled, that is reused, rather than ground up and recreate a new product.
Yes, absolutely. It is much better to reuse a product that's existing than having to transform it, even through recycling.
Okay. So let's say that bottle arrives at a central warehouse with other recycled plastics. How do we get that bottle back to the manufacturer to be refilled and restocked on the shelf? Is that really a practical strategy?
It is happening today in the United States and in other countries. That's what Loop is doing. So the way we operate is to the point you're describing. We are bringing all of the bottles into a central location when they are being sorted and stored and cleaned and being sent back to each of the manufacturers.
So the manufacturer doesn't have to worry about any of the complexities of the cleaning, and when you have a big container of that particular bottle, you can ship it back to the manufacturer and they just throw it back into their production loop.
It's absolutely correct.
My 5 minutes are up, so I'm going to turn to Senator Mullen.
Thank you, Chairman. Once again, thank you for the witnesses for being here. I'll start with Mr. Debus. In your testimony, which, by the way, your voice carries quite well. I was sitting there listening to you, and I thought maybe you should have a voiceover job too, because I was impressed by that. It reminded me of my colleague from Oklahoma, James Lankford. He's got one of those voices too. Not much of a face, but a good voice. No, I'm kidding. Not you, sir. Just talking about James. I'm kidding. He's a very good friend of mine. But in your testimony, you stated that reusable packaging companies in the supply chain continue to demonstrate success in responsible management of plastics. How can reusable packaging support the upcycling and recycled plastic content?
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of great activity taking place in the market, and RPA member manufacturing companies as well taking back 100% of their products from the user community in order to recycle and reprocess into new product manufacturing. It's part of that full circle system, that closed loop, if you will, of bringing back their products. They're of value, so they can use them and regrind in recycled material into other products. They also really look to put high recycled content rates in their manufactured products. One of our member companies has an average of over 80% of recycled content in their pallets and their bulk bins of plastic-based products. So they're achieving really that full circularity in terms of utilizing plastic products, but then getting those products back and continuing to use that material when it's time for its recycling and its intended reuse. For upcycling, it's basically taking the waste material of recycled resin and putting it back into useful products. If you look at the EPA waste hierarchy pyramid, it's going from, excuse me, a lower part of the pyramid to going up from recycling to source reduction of reuse. Or in the circular economy technical cycle, it's going from the outer loop of recycling to the inner loop of preferred activity. So it's really an upcycling process of taking the plastic material and putting them into useful and valuable products that then can go from recycling to reuse or waste management to waste prevention, and allowed to really, get tremendous value associated with the continued life of that product.
How prevalent is reusable packaging in the supply chain right now in different markets, various markets?
Yeah, reusable packaging for the supply chain are the workhorses of commerce. There's an estimate about of all the industrial and consumer products that move in this country, over 90 cents move on a pallet, for example. So they're behind the scenes, but they're ubiquitous in the economies and the markets all around us. It does range pretty considerably between vertical markets. The automotive industry, for example, is a big user of reusable packaging. They've got more tighter loops between parts to assembly, and they definitely have that continuous program in terms of distributing products for their use. The retail industry, that's where you've got a lot of work that's needed. Excuse me, for example, so retail is one that could definitely use some additional, penetration or adoption associated with reusable packaging. So there's great variability associated with the market adoption of reusable packaging for the supply chain.
Well, when we start talking about reusable, which is a great concept, I mean, the chairman brought up the fact that milk deliveries used to be done that way, and I understand that. But every time you touch a product, there's labor cost. And cost is associated with anything that we do. It's got to be economically reasonable for us to be able to do that. And so when we start talking about reusable, you start realizing that the most cost in every product out there is labor. So how do we combine those two? Because each time you touch that product, each time you touch it, every time you touch this bottle, every time you touch a reusable product, there's costs associated with that. So how do you merge those? Because we have labor costs going through the roof here in the United States, which is good. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it also comes with the cost too. So how do you make that efficient for the consumers? Because ultimately, that's who's buying the product. Anybody want to take that on? It's a hard one, right?
No, I'm happy to kick off. It's a great question, and then look for the builds for my co-panelists. There is cost of labor in the production of single-use packaging also today. So they are not limited to only reuse. I think you're touching on a very good point, but you have proof on business modeling exercise, and we talked about it, about business, which at scale are profitable on a reusable side versus single use. And that's because you're also making savings on reusing your asset as many times as you can.
Okay.
I was going to say, this is where scale or volume becomes critical, is because with volume, we're able to drive down the efficiencies at certain touch points, filling trucks up with full loads when they're being transported, say, from point of collection to point of maintenance or back to the packing lines, for example. And so when we talk about scaling reuse, it really is about having that volume efficiencies to be able to optimize the touch points, drive costs down at each step of the way. The unique thing about reusable packaging is that it really brings the supply chain or consumers together with brands, because you all care now about the packaging. The packaging has value to it, whereas today, before with single use, you basically pass that packaging down and you resolve yourself of no longer having accountability or responsibility of it. With reusable packaging, the touch points is everybody's benefiting from the reusable packaging properties that are designed to be able to work within each of those steps along the supply chain. But it really requires that coordination in working in partnership among those who touch the product to be able to optimize those savings as well. And that's where that system thinking comes into play, is to be able to really generate the biggest economic and environmental outcome associated with reuse.
Thank you. I went over my time here. I apologize about that.
All good. Thank you, Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley, and thank you to our ranking member for continuing to focus on the issue of plastics, because it is an unnatural substance and does not biodegrade and just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. We are seeing it increasingly in things like women's breast milk, in things like the contents of a baby's diaper, in things like raindrops falling through the sky in Colorado. So focusing on preventing this, and also understanding what the potential harms are of all that microplastic and all that plastic waste, I think is a very valuable use of the committees and subcommittees' time. So my plaudits to Senator Merkley, for whom this is a great cause and passion. Ms. Schmid, Senator Sullivan and I have done a couple of plastics bills, Save Our Seas and Save Our Seas 2.0, and we're in the process of working on Save Our Seas 3.0 right now. And one of the areas in which I expect we will likely focus is the area of recycling, and how spectacularly unsuccessful ordinary recycling presently is, with less than 10% of what you put in your blue bin actually ending up recycling, with less than 2% of recycled content in new plastics, and trying to figure out how to make recycling work, I think is going to be a very important piece of this. So I would love to have your advice on what you think the best things are that the federal government could do to promote more effective recycling and to eliminate sham recycling. And if you have a quick response, I'd welcome it now, but I'd also encourage you to take that back as a question for the record and give a more fulsome response if you would care to.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for the question. It is a topic that would require a bit more sustained responses, so I will take it back.
Why don't we take that? That'd be fine. And in your sector of the economy, Mr. DeBose, are there incentives or other things that the government could do to encourage more reuse? And in particular, can we get rid of peanuts? Those damn little foam things?
Right. Make reusable peanuts, that could be it's a nice idea. We should talk after the hearing.
Yeah, it's a good second use for the damn things, but anyway.
No question about it. The one thing we have to look at is reuse can be very complex in terms of the requirements of that full system to work. And many times it's an investment. Companies are putting capital forward to produce a pool of reusable assets, or they're changing their processes internally and requires additional manpower or streamlining of operations in order to make it work. And so it's an investment in process change.
Well, do me a favor and make us some recommendations, if you would, on how we can support those process changes, because I think that's a win-win situation if you can get over the initial hurdle of the investment required to make the process changes.
Yeah, thank you.
For my last question, Ms. Meng, welcome. Thank you for being here. The other bill that I'm working on is called the Reduce Act, and that would put a fee on virgin plastic that is designated for single-use plastic products. Because at the moment, one of the things that is holding back recycling in that area is that it's cheaper to make it new than it is to get it out of recycling. And it's very hard to convince economically motivated entities like corporations to do things that are against their economic interests. So it's a policy choice that we have to make to put recycled plastic and new manufactured plastic onto the same footing. That is the definition of what economists would call a negative externality, that by virtue of using the new plastic, you're adding more plastic to the system, making life more dangerous, adding more waste to the ocean, adding more waste to the system, and putting more of a burden on people. And if there's no charge for that, why would, it's hard to, you're letting people getting away with something that economists would say they should not be allowed to get away with. So if you're a pure market economist, you would want to address this problem. What is MacArthur's advice in this area?
Thank you. Excellent question and kind of excellent thoughts on the topic. I think you're entirely correct that we need to be internalizing these externalities and bringing ourselves to kind of a level playing field. A fee on virgin plastic designated kind of for single-use plastics, I think, is a logical way to do that. There are countless tools that we can use, but the reality is that we need to be doing something to level the playing field.
Take a look at the Reduce Act and get back to us with any comments or thoughts you might have, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for this. Again, I think a lot of American corporations have developed a partial market economy business model as to, free market when it comes to their pricing and selling of their product, but passing on to the public, socializing the externalities that they may cause. That just isn't market theory. And the selective use of market theory has caused a lot of harm, whether it's in carbon emissions or in plastic waste or across the board, and thank you for continuing your focus in this area.
Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to, is it Save Our Seas? What's the name? Save Our Seas 3.0. Save Our Seas 3.0, bipartisan collaboration. And I know those of us who live on the coast, and I think you were doing that with Senator Sullivan, right? And I know Alaska, we hear a lot about their concerns about the Pacific Gyre and the amount of plastic waste that washes up, as well as the...
We pick it up on our shores with garbage bags. They have to pick it up on their shores with front-end loaders and dumpsters because of the Pacific flow of plastic waste.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think it's an interesting point about the economics involved, because my impression, going back to when Oregon first implemented recycling of bottles, and all the bottles were glass, is that those who delivered the product were happy to have the bottles washed and reused because it was cheaper than buying a new bottle, because it takes a lot of energy to create a glass bottle melting. It was the folks who made the bottles who at that point were extremely resistant, because obviously they'd get to sell less bottles if the existing bottles were used. But with plastics, the economics often are different in that it can be cheaper, as my colleague pointed out, to make a new one than to recycle an existing piece. But it's the externalities of the impact of that plastic downstream that aren't taken into account. I wanted to ask you, Ms. Meng, as the foundation has worked with partners to implement larger scale reuse and refill, are there like a top 3, here are the biggest obstacles we've encountered?
Excellent question, and I will kind of look to the rest of the panel also for their experience. But I do think that the challenge that we see from folks is we have had businesses asking for a level playing field because the need for shared infrastructure at scale, kind of standardized infrastructure, is crucial. And so in an individual company, it's a real challenge to kind of build out that infrastructure to establish sufficient collection points or access points for consumers. And so they're looking for policy intervention to really help bring folks together to collaborate to get the shared infrastructure at scale that they need to make it work economically. So I think that's kind of the big challenge that we're hearing.
At scale, it just gets a lot cheaper.
Absolutely.
Okay. And Ms. Schmid, as we think about plastic bottles being reused, and is there a consumer challenge? Consumers get very used. They want their oranges to look orange, and they want their apples with no bruises, and they're kind of used to that kind of the perfect product on the shelf. So, do we find with plastic bottles that are reused that consumers go, oh, why is this bottle got scratches on it? Or are consumers accepting and the manufacturers happy with the consumer response of reused plastic bottles?
Thank you for the question. Reusable packagings are going to rotate several times, and that's something that from our own experience, we are seeing consumers really willing to accept. It's also in the hands of the manufacturer to design the right durable package that is meeting their consumer needs. And then we have a whole industry that has very strong experience in designing product and packaging that delights consumers on a daily basis. And I have fully confidence, based on the work that we have seen already on the platform today, that we are able to deliver against those needs.
Well, let me ask you the same question I asked Ms. Meng, which is, as you work on this project, what are the kind of the top three challenges you're encountering?
I would say there is only one challenge. The challenge is scale. We talked about it previously in talking about labor cost. Costs will be viable once there is sufficient units to flow through the system. What is required is really a system that is competitive versus single use, also in a number of units that flows through the system.
Thank you. And Mr. Debus, I was picturing these plastic pallets. I'm more familiar with wooden pallets, but I'm also familiar with how those wooden pallets break apart, degrade, and so on and so forth. Are the plastic pallets a more durable product? Is that part of why they found acceptance?
They can be, for sure. And many of them are designed to last for many years, hundreds of uses. So there could be some durability properties that plastic pallets offer that, say, wood does not. We are seeing some great advancements, though, in wood pallet suppliers performing reuse capabilities, such as offering inventory management programs and working directly with customers on a managed pool of wood products, wood pallets they can take back and, of course, repair and put them in place. And so we are seeing some reuse models even get into the wood pallet industry as well. And several of our members are wood pallet supplier and pooler companies.
I have so many additional questions, but I'm out of time. I have another hearing that's just started, but our chair of Environment and Public Works has arrived, and so I'm going to turn the hearing over to you. If you'd like to also continue to go as long as you want. Did you want to do any more? I'm good. So the hearing is yours, and if you don't mind, I'm going to leave.
God, do the Lord's work. When I finish my questions, should I gavel out? What should I do?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
We'll give
Happy
you
to
the
do it.
script.
Thanks very much. All right. Ms. Ming, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Nice to see you. Sometimes we hear from critics of the circular economy movement that our reliance on plastic and other single-use items has become so ubiquitous that the only policy solution is to improve our ability to recycle these products. While this is certainly one element of achieving circularity, it overlooks two of the most important tools in our toolbox. One of those is reduction, another is reuse. I believe that achieving circularity in our economy hinges upon our taking an all-of-the-above approach when addressing our consumption and waste management practices. And I'm inspired by the role that reuse and refill infrastructure can play in that transition. My question of you, ma'am, would be, why is it important to consider policy options beyond just recycling as we work to create circularity within our economy? And the second half of my question is, can you share an example with us of a reduction or maybe a reuse policy that has been effective at reducing overall waste? All right. You want me to repeat those questions? Okay.
Nope, I've got notes, excellent questions, and I'm glad to answer them.
Sure.
I think on the question of why we need to be looking beyond recycling, we see that kind of recycling isn't adequate, both in practice and in theory. There is not enough that we can do with recycling due to products that are not easy to recycle, like flexible packaging, and actual systems that are in place that aren't meeting our needs on recycling. So we have to look beyond recycling for solutions. And frankly, some of the solutions outside of recycling are more appropriate for different types of products, are more suited to the products. And so looking upstream is kind of what EMF thinks is critical to meeting the challenges that we face. And I think when we think about kind of looking upstream, we see the great opportunity that is there. So we see that if you replace 20% of plastic packaging with reusable packaging, it's a $10 billion opportunity. If you replace 10% of the plastic packaging on the market, you can keep 50% of plastics out of the ocean annually. So there's a huge opportunity here, both economically and environmentally, and we need to kind of be aware of what all of our options are when we're thinking about tackling those challenges. On your question about whether there are kind of reuse policies that we can point to that are...
Just a good example or two on, if you will, on reduction or reuse policy.
Yep.
Yeah.
So reuse policy that's effective, I think we have a number of policies that are kind of in the early stages that are really great on reuse that we're really excited about, like reuse targets that we're seeing kind of currently negotiated in the EU, up and running in France in the near term. But when we think about what we've seen proven time and time again, I think bottle bills are a classic example that we look to and across U.S. states that we've seen. They really do drive return rates, and if we're incorporating reuse into those systems, we're in a position to be getting packaging back to be reused very efficiently and effectively.
All right, thank you. Is it Clements? Who are you named after?
So it's a French name.
I thought so. All right. Bienvenue. Welcome. Ms. Schmidt, Mademoiselle, you mentioned in your testimony that the United Nations views reuse as, and I think this is a quote, the most scalable solution to reduce plastic waste at its source. How has Loop been able to partner with other businesses such as Walmart and in order to promote reusable packaging? That's one question. And a follow-up would be, how can the federal government work alongside the private sector companies to scale reuse and refill infrastructure and technology?
Thank you,
Thank
Senator
you.
Carper, for the questions. Loop works with brand manufacturers and retailers to transition from a disposable system into a reusable system in the least disruptive way. So it's really about handling for that supply chain the reverse logistic in a way that disrupts the existing and very efficient supply chain to the least possible. Working with, you name them, Walmart, but also over 200 brand manufacturers, including Procter & Gamble and Nestle, we are able to develop reusable packages that are being enjoyed by consumers, and upon return, Loop is collecting them back, sorting, storing them, cleaning them, and we also reimburse deposit.
Yeah. How do you collect them back?
We collect them back from the store where they are being currently returned by consumers, or any other location that has a Loop return point.
Okay, good, thank you.
you want me to address the question
I do.
on
Yeah, please.
the economics?
Yeah, if you would.
So what's really important in the loop system, the package is an asset to the brand manufacturer as opposed to a cost of goods sold. And in making the package an asset, you enable manufacturer to innovate and create a fundamentally better package and a better consumer experience. This is what, as a brand manufacturer or producer, you are really thriving for, is being able to delight consumers, and that's what they are able to do on a reusable package much better than on a single-use package.
Any idea where that idea came from? That's a very clever idea.
The idea of a reusable package?
Yeah.
I don't think that's
Has that
a
been
new
around
idea.
for a while?
I think we call it the milkman.
My father, one day when I was in grade school, my colleagues and I in my school were out on the playground playing, and the folks started, the other kids started talking about who they were named after. And they asked who I was named after. I didn't know. And that night I went home and at supper I said to my dad, who am I named after? We don't have any Toms in our family. And he said, Speak your milkman. He said, son, you're named after the milkman. And that was when we actually had milkmen. And we had a milkman named Tom. And we moved a lot then, but we always had the same milkman, so who knows? I like milk, I know that. So.
I'll ask if our milkman was named Clémence.
All right. Clemens, I have another question, if you don't mind, dealing with lessons learned. I often like to say in life that we need to find out what works and do more of that. For recycling, we often look to our state or local initiatives that are successfully promoting circularity. My home state of Delaware recently passed a law that would ban food establishments from using single-use polystyrene containers and other plastic items like coffee stirrers. And while we're still waiting for our governor to sign this bill into law, I look forward to the lessons that we gain from this Delaware law and other similar legislations. I also believe that we can learn from the international community, from countries beyond our borders, including France, about successful reuse and refill policies. My question, my next question, probably my last question of you, Mademoiselle, having worked to launch Loop Global across 3 continents, is that right, 3 continents? What lessons can we learn from the international community, as well as from states and from municipalities, when it comes to reusable or refillable products and infrastructure?
Thank you for this very important question.
De rien.
The first learning is there is a market demand for reuse. Consumers are ready and already experiencing it in many sectors. So there is a need to scale, and we see this across all of the market. The second learning I will bring to this committee, as you rightly pointed it out, is some countries have already taken the forefront of working policies together with the business in order to foster and propel reuse. And in my home country, as France, which is clearly leading the way also in Europe, we have seen reuse targets, reuse mandate coming through legislation, which have fostered the creation of the reverse infrastructure, and we are seeing the market developing extremely fast. So I would summarize in making sure this government passes legislation to support reuse.
All right, thank you. Is it Tim? And how do you pronounce your last name, Tim?
Debus,
Okay, thank you. Has anyone ever mispronounced it?
all the time.
Like, anyone ever say, I missed the bus?
5 letters, but it's can be tricky.
Okay, all right. Good. Mr. Dubas, what are some of the lessons learned from your work? What are some of the lessons learned from your work at the Reusable Packaging Association that might help us achieve a more circular economy?
Well,
And how can we encourage other industries to pursue policies like incorporating reusable shipping supplies, which are both good. I think they're good for business. I think they're good for the environment. Please. Go ahead.
Very much so, and thank you. The biggest lesson is seeing reusable systems in action is that they create tremendous opportunity and value within the supply chain infrastructures and the participating parties. There's a lot of discovery that takes place. When you're incorporating a reusable packaging system, you have to know every step of the way where that package is being handled. And that opens the eyes for a lot of businesses to see other improvement areas that can take place, whether it's in their shipping or the warehouse, whether it's their behind the stores and stocking merchandise for point of sale. There's a lot of opportunities that come up with reusable packaging that people discover, and it becomes an aha moment of, wait, if we can do this, then this leads to other benefits. And so that's the biggest takeaway that I've seen, and especially being in the field, is that reuse breeds a level of performance that companies don't turn away from once they establish that system. They don't go back to a single-use model because they're generating benefits throughout the whole system. They're saving money and they're providing a better experience for those handling the items. So there's not a lot of turning back. And I think as far as really cultivating reuse systems, I mentioned earlier, it's an investment. And so how can policy help with investments for the return or the payback that takes place maybe a year or two down the line? A lot of our companies are looking at the immediate reporting second quarter. How do we achieve efficiencies today? And sometimes that investment in reuse can take a year or two for that payback and for that return. And so anything now, whether it's tax breaks or grants or things that can help generate the financial investment in reuse models would be very valuable.
All right, good. One last question for J.C. Ming. And I believe that the reuse and refill infrastructure present a promising alternative to single-use plastics. My guess is you do too. But in the Environmental Protection Agency's draft strategy to address plastic pollution, the agency describes how the federal government should use its power of acquisition and procurement to promote sustainable supply chains for materials that are used in federal buildings. My question, Ms. Ming, do you believe that our federal government could successfully implement reuse and refill infrastructure in some of our federal buildings? And what are maybe some of the best examples of single-use products that could be replaced by reuse and refill infrastructure?
Wonderful question, and thank you. Yeah, the EPA plastic strategy is a really exciting development, and I think this is a key piece of kind of the work that we need to be doing on reuse. I will point you first off to the GSA has an advisory committee that published kind of a roadmap exactly on this topic for different pilots that can be conducted both by procurement officers and facility-specific pilots. But when we think about what are some of the actions that the federal government can take and what products can be transitioned to reuse, the obvious ideas are kind of drinking fountains as a replacement, kind of building the infrastructure for reusable water or water bottles. And then we can look to the food service areas, so cafeterias and other things that may be replaced with reusable foodware if that's not already in place. I will continue to think on that and maybe get back to you with a few additional ideas.
Good. Well, you may have a chance to do that. We're going to be submitting questions. Some of our colleagues who are not here, and some who were here, will be submitting questions to each of you we call them questions for the record, or QFRs. And we'll ask senators to submit their questions for the record through the close of business on Thursday, August 24th, and we'll compile those questions and we'll send them to you and ask you to reply to us by Thursday, August 24th. And closing, let me just thank you all. Merci beaucoup. And thank each of you for appearing for us today and for your testimony, and not but really for what you do with your lives. I hope they provide your work provides you with great satisfaction. Mine certainly does for me. We're asking to. Yeah, just for a point of clarification, senators will be allowed to submit questions for the records through the close of business on Thursday, August 10th. And again, we'll ask you all to respond by Thursday, August 24th. And I don't know if how they say this in French, but and we have a saying here in America, like when something is over, we say that's a wrap. It's a wrap. So, but we're grateful to all of you. One of my favorite people, favorite leaders, if you will, from other countries, is the leader of France. And President Ms. Biden hosted a state dinner for French President Macron about a year or two ago, and I had the opportunity to chat with him a bit there. He had spoken to a joint session of the Congress about 2 years ago, and wonderful. I got to shake hands with him and chat with him briefly before he spoke. And in his address that day to the joint session of Congress, he said these words. He said, "This is the only planet we're going to have." And he went on to say, "There's no planet B. This is the only one." And I told him at the state dinner that I have quoted him many times in saying that, and I've never given him credit for the quote. And he said, "We have a special name in France for people like you who steal our material without attribution." And then we had a good laugh. All right, keep up the good work. You're doing great things for our planet. The only one we're going to have. Take care. And with that, I think we're adjourned. Au revoir.